the town that watches. Slow, haunting ambience, wind through pine trees, a distant highway hum fading into silence. The bus rolled into the small mountain town just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the jagged Colorado peaks, not with a warm glow, but as though something had swallowed it whole. Fiona Carter pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and watched the pine trees blur past in the fading light. They were so dense here, so tall. A old growth timber that had been standing long before the town existed, long before anyone had thought to carve roads through it. The trees didn't just grow here. They loomed. They watched. She exhaled a long, slow breath that fogged the glass. Another town, another beginning, another place that wasn't home. Her father, Daniel Carter, sat beside her with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes fixed on nothing. He had that look again, the one that had settled over him in the months following her mother's death, like a low fog that never fully lifted. Fiona had stopped trying to blow it away. The grief lived in him now. It had moved in and rearranged the furniture. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, once. That was enough. The bus hissed as it slowed, hydraulics exhaling like a tired beast. The doors folded open and cold mountain air swept in, clean and sharp and flavored with pine resin. Us wood smoke. And something else Fiona couldn't name. Something alive. Something that made the fine hairs on the back of her neck prickle. She stepped down onto the pavement of Black Ridge, Colorado population, unknown, and immediately felt it. The sensation that she was being watched. Not in the casual way of a curious small town, not the gentle nosiness of neighbors peering through lace curtains. This was different, deliberate, focused, like standing in the crosshairs of something ancient and patient. She turned slowly. Across the narrow main street, in front of a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Iron Pines Grill, a group of teenagers stood in the amber wash of a lantern-style streetlight. They were maybe 7 or 8 of them, ranging from her age to a few years older. They wore the effortless ease of people who had never questioned whether they belonged somewhere, and they were staring at her. Not one of them smiled. Not one of them waved. They simply watched, with the flat, measuring intensity of a wildlife patrol spotting something unfamiliar in its territory. One of them, a tall boy with close-cropped dark hair and a jaw carved from the same stone as the mountains, leaned down slightly and whispered something to the girl beside him. The girl's eyes flicked to Fiona, then back. Her expression was unreadable. Fiona tightened her jacket, grabbed her duffel bag from the luggage compartment, and looked straight ahead. Fine. Small town. People stared. She had survived worse. What she didn't hear, couldn't possibly have heard from across the street, was the whisper that the tall boy passed along the group like a current through water. The Alpha needs to hear about this tonight. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan Kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, comment where you are watching from. And subscribe for epic Lycan King romances where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The Alpha's shadow, deep bass undertone. Wind picks up. The sound of enormous paws on forest floor, silent as snow. Blake Hunter stood on the ridge that overlooked all of Black Ridge, the wind cutting through his dark hair with familiar ease, as if it knew him, as if the mountain itself had made peace with his presence long ago. Below, the town glowed against the endless dark of the forest. Warm, amber squares of light, the distant hum of life. People eating dinner, arguing over nothing, watching television, the small, ordinary rhythms that made up a human evening. Blake had never fully understood those rhythms. He understood the forest better. The way the elk moved through the lower valleys, the pressure in the air before a storm rolled in from the north, the precise moment when winter decided it had finished with autumn. Then he understood power, territory, the invisible web of obligation and loyalty that bound the Black Ridge Pack together. What he had never understood, until recently, was the restlessness. For the past 3 weeks, his wolf had been pacing inside him with the frantic energy of a caged thing, not aggressive, not fearful, just searching, like an instinct straining toward something just beyond perception. He had tried running it out, miles through the old growth at full speed, or leaping deadfall and crossing frozen creeks in the dark. He had tried throwing himself into pack business, patrol disputes, territory negotiations with the Aspen Ridge Pack, the ongoing tension with the rogue faction that was creeping too close to the eastern border. Nothing quieted it. And then tonight, between one heartbeat and the next, the pacing stopped. The wolf went still, calm, not the emptiness of exhaustion, something else, something new and yet bone-deep familiar. The way coming home feels even when you're not sure where home is. Something had arrived. A deep voice came from the shadows behind him, unhurried and certain. "You feel it too." Blake turned. His father, Alpha Marcus Hunter, stepped from between the trees with the measured authority of a man who had never needed to announce himself. He was broad-shouldered, iron-haired, and wore the weight of leadership the way old timber wore weather, carved by it, made stronger by it. Marcus stopped beside his son. He did not look at Blake. He looked at the town below, and his expression held something rare. Tenderness. The bond. "It is close, Blake. The moon goddess has placed her within your reach." Blake's jaw tightened. He had grown up hearing about this. The mate bond. The sacred pairing that the moon goddess wove into the fabric of lycanthrope existence. A connection so fundamental that some wolves spent their entire lives searching for it and never found it. Some went mad without it. Some simply became hollow. He had told himself it didn't matter if it came for him or not. He had a pack to lead, a legacy to carry. He didn't need the mythology, but the wolf inside him, the part that bypassed logic entirely, was already turning toward the town below with trembling focus. "I don't even know who she is." Marcus glanced at him with the ghost of a smile. "You will know her the moment you're close enough. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked." Blake said nothing. Below him, the lights of Black Ridge flickered in the evening wind. Somewhere down there, unknown and unsuspecting, was a girl who would change everything. His wolf pressed against the inside of his skin. Find her. The girl in the hallway. School ambiance, lockers slamming, voices overlapping, then silence when he appears. Black Ridge High was built of dark timber and stone, as if the architects had taken their cues from the mountain and decided that a school should feel like a fortress. The hallways were narrow, the lighting was amber and low, and the students moved through it with the wordless coordination of a single organism. Fiona found that deeply unsettling. Most schools had cliques, social orbits that barely touched, drama, chaos, the ordinary entropy of teenagers left to sort themselves. Here, everyone seemed aligned to the same invisible frequency. They moved in clusters that felt less like friend groups and more like units, and they had all, at various points in her first morning, stopped to look at her. Not all with hostility, some with open curiosity, some with a strange, assessing blankness, a few with what might have been excitement. One girl, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, with box braids and an air of authority that surpassed her 17 years, had actually smiled at Fiona with what seemed like genuine warmth, but then glanced quickly around as if checking whether she was allowed to. By the time lunch period arrived, Fiona had developed a dull headache behind her eyes and the specific social exhaustion of someone who has been performing normalcy for 6 hours straight. She wanted a corner, a wall at her back, a few minutes of not being watched. She turned the corner near the eastern hallway of lockers, eyes down on her class schedule, and trying to remember where room 114 was. and walked directly into someone's chest. Books hit the floor. Her schedule fluttered sideways. She stumbled back, caught herself on the lockers, and looked up with an apology already half-formed. The words did not come. The boy standing in front of her was tall, significantly taller than her, with broad shoulders that filled the hallway in a way that should have felt imposing, but instead felt like shelter. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, jaw set, cheekbones that belonged in a portrait painted by firelight. And his eyes. They were gold, not hazel, not amber, not light brown. Gold, the color of late afternoon light on October leaves, warm and deep and terribly unsettlingly alive. And they were fixed on Fiona with an intensity that bypassed polite social distance entirely. The world seemed to slow down slightly, the noise of the hallway muffled as though someone had turned the volume down. He stared at her. She stared at him. Around them, the students who had been moving through the hall slowed almost imperceptibly. A pause, an intake of breath held collectively. He crouched smoothly, unhurried, and began gathering her fallen books. "Sorry, I should have been watching where I was going." His voice was low, controlled, but she noticed, or imagined she noticed, a slight roughness at the edges of it, as if the words had cost him something. Fiona crouched as well and reached for her schedule. Their fingers brushed against the paper at the same moment. The contact was nothing, barely a touch, but it felt like stepping into a current. The bond awakens. Pulse-like heartbeat rhythm under the narration, low, steady, building. Blake had known, logically, that his mate existed somewhere in the world. His father had told him. The pack elders had spoken of it. The old stories were full of it. Knowing and feeling are different things entirely. The scent reached him first, before he even saw her clearly. As she came around the corner at a distracted hurry, before the collision, before eye contact, just a wave of something that hit him like a key finding a lock that had been hidden so deeply inside him he'd forgotten it existed. Wildflowers, cold rain, and underneath it, something that wasn't a scent at all but a sensation, like recognition translated into smell. Like the olfactory equivalent of a word you've been trying to remember for years suddenly surfacing, whole and clear. His wolf did not pace. His wolf did not prowl. His wolf went absolutely reverently still. Mine. He had gathered her books on automatic instinct, needing his hands to do something while his brain recalibrated reality. And then she had crouched beside him, and their fingers had touched over a sheet of paper, and the current had gone through him like a wire. He stood. She stood. He handed her the books. She took them, clutching them to her chest. Ice staring at him with eyes the color of a winter forest, gray-green and complicated, holding depths she probably didn't know were there. "Thanks." A single word, slightly breathless. She moved to step around him. His hand caught her wrist. Not firmly, barely a touch, just 2 fingers against the inside of her wrist where her pulse beat fast and visible. He hadn't consciously decided to do it. The wolf had moved. She stopped. They both stood very still. But the spark that passed between them was not metaphorical. It was physical, a warmth that moved up his arm and settled in his chest, spreading outward like light through fog. From her expression, she felt it too. Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes widened. She looked down at his hand, still barely touching her, and then back up at his face with an expression he read as a mix of confusion, alarm, and something she was trying very hard to extinguish. "What was that?" Blake released her, slowly, with restraint that cost him more than he would ever admit. "You felt it too." It wasn't a question. He already knew the answer. The bond didn't lie, and it didn't discriminate. It had fired in both directions the moment they touched, same current, same circuit. She stared at him. He could see the war behind her eyes, the rational, self-protective instinct that said strange things should be rejected, and the deeper animal instinct that said this is real, this is true. Do not run from this. The rational instinct won. For now. She stepped back, books pressed hard to her chest like a shield. I have to get to class. She walked away at a pace that was barely below a run. Blake stood in the hallway and let her go, because that was the right thing to do. Because the bond was not a trap. Because the moon goddess did not make prisoners of her chosen. But the hallway around him had gone absolutely silent, and when he turned, he found a dozen pairs of eyes on him. Pack members. They had all felt the ripple, the seismic shift of an alpha bond awakening. The dark-haired girl with the box braids, Tessa, his cousin, his most trusted, was watching him with wide eyes and a slow smile spreading across her face. Not a word. Blake, I haven't said anything. Not a single word, Tessa. She pressed her lips together, but the smile remained, bright and irrepressible, as she turned back to her locker. Secrets beneath the moon. Night sounds, crickets, wind through tall pines, a single wolf howl, distant, mournful, then gone. Fiona lay in her new bedroom and stared at the ceiling and refused to sleep. The room was small. The floorboards were old and creaked when she shifted. The window faced east, toward the forest, and the moon was enormous tonight, a full, pale face pressing against the glass as if trying to see inside. She had unpacked methodically, books alphabetized, clothes folded. Her mother's photograph on the nightstand in its usual place. The small rituals of making a strange space feel occupied, if not quite like hers, but the ceiling would not cooperate. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw gold. His eyes. Blake Hunter. She had learned his name by the end of the day through the indirect method of everyone around her saying it with a particular careful reverence, the way you say the name of something weather-like and large. Blake Hunter, who had looked at her as though she were the only solid thing in a shifting world. Blake Hunter, whose two-finger touch on her wrist had felt like being struck by something she didn't have a word for yet. She turned onto her side. The forest outside her window rustled with something that wasn't just wind. There were sounds in it that she told herself were ordinary. Owls, nightbirds, the movement of deer through undergrowth. But underneath those sounds was something else. Presence. She sat up. The moon was so bright that the forest's edge was visible in sharp relief. Silver light on dark bark, shadows pooled between the trunks like ink. Beautiful and cold and deeply, impossibly old. She got up. She told herself she was just getting air. She put on her jacket and her boots and stepped out the back door onto the narrow wooden porch. The mountain cold hit her immediately, clean and merciless. She breathed it in. Then the howl came. Not distant this time. Close. Or maybe 200 feet into the trees. Maybe less. And it was nothing like the wolves she had heard recordings of, documentary wolves, wildlife preserve wolves, small and plaintive. This was deep and resonant and layered with harmonics that she felt more in her sternum than heard with her ears. It rose and broke and hung in the cold air and faded slowly, like a bell that refuses to stop ringing. She couldn't move. The trees at the forest's edge shifted, not with wind, but with weight, and a shape stepped out into the moonlight. She had expected a wolf. She had not expected this. It was the size of a draft horse, or close to it, a wolf-shaped shadow of impossible scale, with a coat the color of deep water, and eyes that caught the moonlight and gave it back as gold. It moved with the liquid quiet of something at the absolute apex of its food chain, which she understood instinctively and completely, the way prey animals understand predators even when they have never seen one. It stopped at the edge of the tree line, and it looked at her. Not through her, not around her, directly, completely, without any pretense of animal otherness. Those gold eyes held something she recognized, something she had seen that morning in a high school hallway. Recognition. She should have run. Every rational signal was screaming for it, but her feet were rooted. And some instinct deeper than logic had taken the wheel, and that instinct said, "Still, steady, this is not a threat." The great wolf stepped toward her, each paw placed with deliberate gentleness on the cold ground, and then, with a sound that she would never quite find adequate words for, it changed. Not a metaphor, not a trick of light. The shape of it shifted, bones resettling, form reorganizing, an entire architecture of biology rewriting itself in the span of a few impossible seconds. And standing in the moonlight, wearing dark clothing and an expression of careful, watchful stillness, was Blake Hunter. The truth of the pack. Silence. Then a slow, careful conversation by firelight. Two people building something fragile and essential. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Blake stood very still, giving her the space to process. He had done this before. Not this precisely, but similar moments of revelation. Similar silences that needed to be inhabited fully before anything useful could be said. He had learned patience from the mountain and his father in equal measure. "You're a werewolf." It came out flat and declarative, not a question. He respected that. "Yes." She pressed the back of one hand briefly to her mouth, dropped it, straightened. The whole town. Not every person. Well, but most of the families have been here a long time. She looked at him with those complicated gray-green eyes that he was already beginning to catalog. This expression was triage, sorting through everything she had observed since arriving and recontextualizing it through this new lens. The way people acted when I arrived, the way they looked at me. A new person in pack territory draws attention, especially... He stopped. Especially what? He held her gaze. Especially someone the bond recognizes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what does that mean? The bond? Blake sat down on the porch steps, giving her the height advantage, making himself smaller, less threatening. He had thought about this conversation or some version of it, since the moment in the hallway, and he had known from the start that the most important thing was not to overwhelm her. Lycanthropes help werewolves. We have a concept called a mate bond. It's not chosen. It's not earned. It's assigned, I suppose, is the only word that fits, by something we call the moon goddess, a pairing between two people that is recognized on a level below conscious thought, below choice. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold or something else. And you're saying that the thing that happened in the hallway today, was the bond recognizing you? Yes. A long, long pause. I am a normal human person who just moved to a new town. I know. I have a biology textbook in my bag that does not contain a single chapter about this. I know that too. So you'll understand when I tell you that what you're describing is impossible. He looked at her steadily. I just shifted in front of you, on your back porch. In the moonlight, was that impossible? She looked at the tree line and back at him, and out at the moon and back at him, and something in her face slowly, reluctantly, admitted defeat. No, I suppose not. She sat down. Not beside him. 2 steps above, distance maintained, but sat, which meant she intended to stay, which meant she was still here. Blake exhaled something that had been compressed in his chest since that morning. They talked until the moon had moved a quarter of the way across the sky. The enemy in the dark. The warmth of the previous scene falls away. Cold, menace, a different kind of dark. Or 3 miles east of Black Ridge, where the tree line broke against a granite outcropping above a dried creek bed, a fire burned in a shallow pit. Around it, 8 figures crouched in the particular comfortable stillness of those accustomed to waiting. Their leader was not large. This was often surprising to those who met him for the first time. Dorian Voss stood barely 6 feet, lean as a wire, with colorless eyes and a face that had been handsome once and was now simply sharp. He wore patience the way other people wore arrogance, which made him considerably more dangerous. He had been watching Black Ridge for a month, not with scouts. Scouts were detectable. With patience. With the particular information gathering that happened when you simply waited long enough for events to arrange themselves into readable patterns. The Hunter pack was stable, organized. Marcus Hunter had run it well for 30 years and had produced a son who, by all accounts, would run it better. Oh, a generational strength. Generational strengths had generational weaknesses. One of his wolves, the youngest, eager and slightly trembling, had returned from the road that passed through town 20 minutes earlier with news. Say it again. The Alpha's son, Blake Hunter. He found his mate today. She came in on the bus. Human girl, new to town. The whole pack felt the bond snap into place. Dorian poked a stick into the fire. Sparks drifted upward and died. Human. Human. No wolf at all. No training. No pack instinct. No... Unprotected, you mean? Silence around the fire. An alpha's unbonded mate is the most defended thing in a pack's territory. An alpha who has just found his mate, just found her, no claim made yet, the bond still forming, is distracted, emotional, divided between what he knows and what he feels. He let that sit. In 2 weeks, the bond will be sealed. He will be complete, focused, unassailable. Every wolf in that pack will fight to the death for both of them. He looked across the fire at the collection of sharp, hungry faces. But right now, for this brief window, the alpha's heart is exposed, vulnerable, and the fastest way to break a wolf's spirit permanently is to take what the moon goddess gave him. Blood moon rising. The night sky. A swollen red moon. The sound of drums. Then chaos, breaking through warmth like glass. The Blood Moon Festival was the oldest tradition the Black Ridge Pack observed. Its origins were older than the town itself, a night of gathering under the red-hued full moon that came once each autumn, when the pack reaffirmed its bonds and celebrated its history and reminded itself what it was defending. For the human residents of Black Ridge, the minority who did not carry wolf blood, it had been gently explained over generations as a harvest celebration. Bonfire, music, food, the kind of warm communal gathering that mountain towns were supposed to have. They accepted this explanation because the alternative required a significant revision of their worldview. For the pack, it was something older and fiercer and deeply necessary. Fiona stood at the edge of the clearing and watched it with open curiosity. She had been in Black Ridge 3 weeks now, 3 weeks of learning about the pack hierarchy, about the territory, about the careful web of loyalty and obligation that held this community together. About Blake, about the bond, which was growing daily, not in a way that felt intrusive or coercive, but in the way that a language becomes more fluent with practice. She was learning the grammar of it, the syntax of his moods, the particular quality of his attention when he was worried about something and trying not to show it. Tessa had taken her under her arm. In the manner of someone who has decided something and is not inviting discussion. You're confused about all of this, and you're pretending you're not, which means you're smart but also probably going to drive yourself crazy. Ask me questions. I don't have a Blake problem about being direct. Fiona had asked questions. She had filed the answers carefully. She was, despite everything, adapting. But the clearing tonight felt different. The bonfire was high. The drumming was steady and low. People moved through the firelight in patterns that had the unconscious coordination of ceremony. Children ran between adults. Elders sat in honored positions at the fire's edge. And under everything, the scent of the pack, that particular warm animal and forest undertone that she had stopped noticing in her daily life, but which was heightened tonight, sharpened by the festival energy, rose and thickened. Blake moved toward her through the crowd, and she felt him before she saw him. On the bond registering his proximity the way a compass registers north. "How are you doing with all of this?" He stood beside her, not touching, giving her the space she had always needed and which he had learned to read precisely. "It's beautiful. It's also deeply strange. I'm holding both of those things at the same time." His mouth curved. She had catalogued that particular expression. Amusement he hadn't decided to suppress. "Oh, that's basically a perfect description of being part of this pack." She laughed. It felt good. It felt... The drums stopped. The silence that fell was total and instantaneous, which was itself wrong. 20 people can't stop moving that fast unless something has triggered a collective alarm. Blake's head came up. She saw his eyes shift, the gold in them bleeding brighter, the wolf rising to the surface. Around the clearing, other faces were doing the same thing, sharpening, focusing, the human veneer peeling back to reveal the predator underneath. "Get back! Get behind the..." They came from the tree line on 3 sides. 8 of them, maybe more, shifting as they ran. The mid-shift grotesque and fast, not the careful, graceful transformation she had witnessed from Blake, but something urgent and violent. They hit the edge of the clearing and the screaming began. The Black Ridge wolves responded within seconds. The Alpha's command, not words, was something she felt rather than heard, a pressure in the air, snapped through the pack and they engaged. Blake shifted, right beside her. She had seen it before, but never like this, never in a context of danger, never with the difference in scale so apparent. The massive, dark-coated wolf that stood where he had been turned briefly to check that she was moving, found her eyes with gold ones, held them for one weighted second. Then he turned and hit the nearest rogue wolf like a force of nature. The battle was nothing like stories. It was fast and brutally physical and loud in ways that bypassed intellectual processing and went straight to the base of the spine. She had pressed herself against the stone marker at the far edge of the clearing, and she was watching and trying to think clearly and failing. Then she felt, the one that had gotten around the main engagement. She turned. Pale-coated, scarred around the muzzle, eyes a flat and colorless yellow. It had separated from the fighting with a specific, considered trajectory. Toward her. It gathered itself. She couldn't move. The cold clarity of animal fear had locked every muscle. It launched. The collision that answered it was like a thunderclap. Blake hit the pale wolf midair with the full weight of himself, and they crashed across the frost-hardened ground in a tangle of mass and fury that raised a cloud of dead leaves and frozen dirt. The 2 wolves separated and circled, and then Blake was between her and the rogue, enormous and still, and radiating something that she finally understood was dominance, not aggression, but a fundamental assertion of hierarchy so absolute that the pale wolf's body language crumpled under it. Head down, tail low, eyes averted, defeated. The fight in the clearing resolved in the same direction. Rogues retreating or submitting. The Black Ridge wolves standing, bleeding and victorious, around their injured alpha. Blake shifted back. He was bleeding from a gash along his left shoulder. He crossed the clearing to her in 3 strides, and she had exactly enough time to decide, before he reached her, that she was not going to retreat from him. Not tonight. Not after this. She stepped into him. He stopped, surprised, and then his arms came around her with a care that did not match the ferocity she had just watched him operate at, which undid something in her entirely. The claim. Everything quiet now, firelight fading to embers, just 2 voices, just 2 people at the edge of a decision. They sat on the stone marker at the edge of the clearing for a long time after the others had dispersed. Tessa had tried to stay. Blake had said her name once, quietly, and she had gone. The fire had burned down to a low orange glow. The red moon hung directly overhead, enormous and ancient and patient. In its light, everything had a dreamlike quality. The frost-bitten grass, the darkened tree line, the smoke rising from the embers. Fiona had her knees pulled to her chest. Blake sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and he had been tending to a cut on his forearm with the focused detachment of someone accustomed to his own damage. Does it heal fast? Because of what you are? Yes. By morning this will be gone. By the day after I'll have a scar. By the week after, that will be gone too. She watched the process, something still winding down in her nervous system. Then she said, "You got between me and that wolf." "Yes." "You didn't hesitate. You were across the clearing. I would always get there." "Fiona, whatever the distance, however long it took, I would always get there." She turned her head to look at him. The firelight was in his eyes, and the moonlight, and something else she had been slowly building a vocabulary for. Why? He met her gaze, and she saw something in him she hadn't seen before. Not the control, not the alpha stillness, but the man underneath it, who was less certain than he appeared and more vulnerable than he allowed, and who had been holding a very careful line for 3 weeks out of a respect for her autonomy that she was only now fully understanding the cost of. "Because you are mine to protect, not to own, not to claim against your will, but to guard, for as long as you'll permit it, with everything I have." She was quiet. "I would burn the world down for you. I would stand between you and every rogue pack and every dark thing this mountain contains, without hesitation and without end. That is not poetry. It is simply the most accurate description of what exists in me when I look at you." The fire popped softly. An ember drifted upward and went out. Fiona had spent 2 years since her mother's death learning to carry herself carefully, lightly, quickly, eyes never putting down full weight in any place, never unpacking all the way because unpacking meant believing you were staying, and believing you were staying meant risking the grief of leaving. She had become expert in the performance of impermanence. She looked at Blake Hunter, who was bleeding gently from the shoulder, and watching her with gold eyes that held exactly as much patience as she needed. And she understood, not intellectually, not as a concept, but in the body, in the bone, what the bond was. It was not fate forcing her hand. It was not destiny overriding choice. It was simply recognition. The same recognition that tells you when a song is exactly right for a particular moment, or when a place is exactly where you need to be. Something already true becoming known. She reached out and put her hand over his on the stone. "I have spent 2 years running." He turned his hand under hers, slowly, until their palms were together. "I think I might be ready to stop." He let out a long breath, and the tension that had been held in his whole body, the controlled, careful, patient tension of 3 weeks of restraint, released slowly. "Then stay." Not a command. A question made small and careful, holding all its risk on the surface. She answered it without words. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He pressed his lips to her hair, briefly, tenderly. Overhead, the blood moon moved across the sky, and the forest breathed around them, and in the deepest, oldest part of the Black Ridge Pack's territory, something settled, went still, became complete. The bond sealed. Not with ceremony, not with drama, with a girl and a boy on a stone in the moonlight and the quiet, radical decision to remain. Blood, moon, and the bones of forever. 6 months later. Full moon, the entire pack assembled. Something ancient is happening tonight. The forest remembered everything. That was something Fiona had come to understand over the months she had been part of Black Ridge. The way the land itself held memory, the way the oldest trees carried the compressed weight of everything that had happened between them. Ceremonies, deaths, births, battles, bonds, all of it absorbed and held, the way the rings of old timber record every year of drought and rain. She stood at the edge of the great circle and felt the forest's memory pressing against her back. In front of her, The pack gathered in the wide, natural amphitheater that the mountains had carved out of the old growth, as if they had been waiting for this use for 1,000 years. 200 wolves, pack members from all the surrounding territories, allies who had made the journey across state lines, elders who had not traveled in years, stood in concentric rings around the center of the space, where a stone altar sat flanked by 2 great bonfires. The light was extraordinary. The fires burned white and gold. The full moon above them was the biggest of the year. The Luna's crown, the elders called it, the night when the moon goddess's presence was closest to the earth. The light it cast mixed with the firelight in ways that made the air itself seem to glow. Tessa appeared at Fiona's shoulder, beautiful in deep green, her braids pinned up with small silver pieces that caught the fire. "You're doing that thing where you look calm, but you're actually having a private conversation with yourself about whether this is real." "I might be." "It's real. It was real the day you stepped off that bus. It was real in the hallway. It's been real every single day since." Fiona looked at her. I know it's real. I'm just terrified. Grateful, which is somehow scarier than terrified." Tessa took her hand and squeezed it once, hard. "Good. That means you understand what you're getting. Now go. He's waiting." The crowd parted as she walked toward the center. This was another thing she had learned to inhabit, the way a pack opened for its Luna. Not with deference exactly, with welcome. The difference was not subtle once you knew to look for it. Every face she passed held something, some version of recognition and acceptance and warmth. Old Marcus Hunter, standing near the inner ring, gave her a look that carried everything a father might give a daughter, and she felt the loss of her own father's full presence as a small, manageable ache rather than the engulfing grief it had once been. Her father was here tonight. He stood near the outer ring, slightly bewildered by the scale of it, but upright and present, his eyes clear in a way they hadn't been in years. Blackridge had done something for him, too. She reached the center. Blake stood beside the stone altar in his formal dark clothing, and when he saw her, the careful, composed expression that he wore for the pack cracked open at the edges. She walked to him, and he took both her hands. Alpha Marcus stepped forward. His voice was low and resonant, and carried across the amphitheater without effort, the voice of a man accustomed to being heard across distances. "For as long as the pack has gathered under the Luna's crown, we have come together to witness the sealing of bonds that the moon goddess has made. Tonight we witness a bond older than custom, the bond between an alpha and his mate, between strength and strength, between wolf and the one the wolf chooses." He looked at them both. "The bond does not make you less than what you were. It makes you more than what you could have been alone. Remember that, in every season that follows." Blake turned to face her fully, blocking out the crowd, the fires, and the moon, until the world contracted to the space between them. "I found you at the beginning of the cold season. I think you were always meant to arrive when the light was going, so that you would know what it was that you were staying to defend. Not the warmth, because you found warmth here, but the dark, the difficulty, the parts of this life that aren't easy." She felt something behind her eyes. "I want all of those things with you. The dark and the warmth and everything in between. I want the ordinary mornings and the unbearable winters and the seasons when things go wrong and we have to build them back up. I want the grief and the gratitude and the years of quiet that follow hard things. I want all of it. With you. Only with you." She had prepared words, something careful and articulate, measured and appropriate to the occasion. She had worked on it for 2 weeks. She forgot all of it. "A year ago, I was sitting on a bus going somewhere I didn't want to go, easy next to a man I was frightened for, and I thought that the best I could hope for was to survive the year with both of us intact." Her voice was steady, barely. "I didn't imagine that the town at the end of that road would give me back the thing I thought I had permanently lost. I didn't imagine belonging. I didn't imagine you. She tightened her hands around his. I choose this. I choose you. Every version of you. The man and the wolf and the alpha and the person who learned to wait patiently for 3 weeks while I figured out what I wanted, which is possibly the most remarkable thing anyone has ever done for me. Somewhere in the crowd, Tessa laughed, and was probably the only person who could do that in this moment and have it land as exactly right. Marcus spoke the old words. The pack responded. The fires climbed, and under the Luna's crown, lie in front of the whole of the Black Ridge pack and the watching forest and the enormous patient moon, Blake Hunter and Fiona Carter sealed what had been written between them from the beginning. When he pressed his lips to her forehead after the words were done, she closed her eyes and felt the bond hum, warm and steady, like a heartbeat separate from and aligned to her own, and understood finally what it was. Not a chain, not a cage, not a story told about her from outside. Home. If months later the world would try the Black Ridge pack in the ways that worlds always try things they don't fully understand. Dorian Voss did not accept his defeat at the Blood Moon Festival as the conclusion it was. He regrouped. He made alliances with darker, more desperate forces. He waited for the right moment with a patience that might have been admirable in a different cause. But what he had not accounted for, what he had perhaps always fundamentally failed to understand, was the difference between a wolf protecting territory and a wolf protecting something chosen. Territory is duty. It can be worn down. Choice is something else entirely. The confrontation, when it finally came 3 months after the Luna's crown ceremony, did not happen in darkness or ambush as Dorian had intended. It happened in the open field north of the town, under an overcast February sky, with the full pack assembled in a long line across the frosted grass. Dorian arrived with 24 wolves. He stopped when he saw what was waiting. Not just the Black Ridge pack, 200 strong, organized and calm and absolutely resolute, but 3 allied packs who had traveled through the night to stand in solidarity. An alliance that the Alpha Bond had drawn together, one respectful conversation at a time, over months of relationship building that Dorian had dismissed as social performance. Blake stood at the center, Fiona beside him. Not behind him, beside him. She was not a wolf. She had no claws and no shift and no pack instinct running in her blood. What she had was 3 months of learning and Tessa's training and her own considerable stubborn refusal to be a thing that needed protecting instead of a person who participated in her own story. What she had also, it was the bond, and through it, a clarity of purpose that Dorian Voss, who had never felt such a thing in his life, could not possibly have anticipated. Dorian looked across the field at the assembled wolves and at the girls standing at the Alpha's side, and something in his face calculated and recalculated and finally, grudgingly, accepted the arithmetic. He had come to take what the moon goddess had given. He had not understood, until this moment, that what the moon goddess had given could not be taken. It could only be earned or lost. The rogues retreated before a single blow was struck. Dorian Voss was never heard from in those mountains again. Spring came to Black Ridge the way it always did, slowly, incrementally, with false starts and stubborn cold snaps, and then all at once in a rush of green that made you forget winter had ever happened. Fiona stood on the ridge where Blake had stood on the night she arrived, looking down at the town below. It looked exactly the same as it had then. Wooden storefronts, lantern streetlights, houses nestled into the forest like they had grown there. But she saw it differently now. She saw the Pines Grill, where Tessa held court every Sunday morning, and where the pack's more human-shaped social life played out over coffee and eggs and comfortable argument. She saw the school, where she had stopped being the new girl around the 3rd week and started being simply Fiona, the Luna, the one you could come to with a problem. She saw the streets where she and Blake walked early on cold mornings before the town woke up, talking about everything and nothing, the bond running warm and steady between them. She saw her father's truck in the driveway of their house, a different house than the one they had first rented, a better one they had chosen, and the small evidence of his renewed engagement with the world. A garden he was starting, friends he had made, or a life reforming around new soil. She heard Blake's footsteps behind her. She always did now. The bond announced him like a warm hand on her shoulder before he was even close. He stopped beside her and looked down at the town. Remembering? Comparing. The night I arrived, I looked at this town and thought it was strange and watching and nothing like anywhere I'd ever be at home. And now? She turned to look at him. The man she had not imagined, in the life she had not dared to want. Now I understand. It wasn't strange. It was just waiting to be understood, like most things. He smiled. And it was the real one. The uncommon, unguarded version that she had catalogued as hers from the first time she'd seen it. Below them, Blackridge moved through its morning. Children running to school, elders opening shops, wolves in human skin, living the quiet daily lives that were the substance of everything the pack was and meant. The forest breathed around them, by ancient and patient and full of memory. The bond hummed, warm, steady, permanent. Fiona took Blake's hand. He held it without speaking, which was the kind of understanding that exists past words. The sun climbed above the mountain peaks and lit the town below. And above it all, the girl who had arrived in the dark on a bus going nowhere in particular looked out over the place that had found her, and felt, with a completeness she hadn't believed possible, that she was home. That she had always been coming here. That fate, when it works, is indistinguishable from love. End.